Welcome everybody to the third of four in the Ready, Set, Go as Africa Ready for Action Simplified Complexity series. Today's discussion is all around about how does my organisation benefit and what do we need to do next. So today's session is, as I said, the third and four presentations that we've done in the series. The first one we looked at why projects fail, because understanding why projects fail enables us to manage projects with better success last time. The second one is what does good look like? What does project success look like? And we'll have a little bit more look at that in summary and recap in a minute. And so today's session is all about how does my organisation benefit? We promised a couple of little checklists and to consider the 7 P3M3 perspectives along the way. And the one that we've got on the 25th of September is actually going to look at the benefit that tools can bring to this whole process. So as we said last time, the presenters haven't changed. My name is Andrew Ross. I'm a PPM consultant with Hyde Park. Hyde Park are an Oracle Platinum partner, helping organisations globally implement portfolio, project, program, and cost and risk management solutions. Pierre Morel is a consultant within Hyde Park as well. He's a specialist expert around P3, M3 and P3O. Pierre bridges the gap between the pure business process side of things and the technical benefits that you get from tooling. Pierre today is sitting in a hotel because he's working on a secure site in the UK. Delian, who's not with us today because she's working with a client, she is the HPS lead for portfolio management. She's currently working for an oil and gas and a chemicals company in delivering their portfolio management solutions. So today we're going to work out what we need to do next. After this, we'll talk a little bit about housekeeping. But we're going to then look at a bit of a recap, doing the right things right. It's about portfolio selection and portfolio delivery. Then we're going to take a look at doing things right, and can P3M3 help us with that? As I said earlier, we've got a little checklist for helping you getting things right. We're then going to do a bit more of a deep dive into P3M3, looking at the structure and the 7 perspectives. We've done a little bit of research and we've managed to get some benchmarking data within 20 countries within Africa, and we're going to share that with you today as well. We're then going to take a bit of a look at how we might want to get towards being more efficient and effective in implementing portfolios, programs and projects. And Pierre's built a little roadmap chart to help us with that. We've then got a slide which kind of summarises the day up, and then we're going to open it up to questions from you, our welcome audience. So in terms of housekeeping, if you can please remain muted during the presentation, and please don't turn on video. We would actually like to see your smiley faces, but it consumes so much bandwidth that you'll impact what you're seeing and what you're able to hear. We'll open up the chat and the video, sorry, the audio at the end of the session. So if you do have any questions, you can ask these at the end. If you want to ask questions throughout, if you type it into the chat, you're more than welcome. Do realise that if you put anything in the chat, that everybody can read it and see it. It's not anonymous. If you would like to get the presentation later, it'll be up on our website. And if you want to contact us to talk to any of us about any requirements you may have or any help you might need, please just email us on info or our names as per the beginning. We will, our marketing department will want to survey you to get some feedback, so it helps us improve delivery of further of these sessions. So we would encourage you to provide us with feedback, negative, positive, whatever it is. We'd love to hear about it. So before I hand over to Pierre, I just want to quickly recap what we talked about last week. So previously, we talked about two sides of things: portfolio definition and portfolio delivery. This is a typical portfolio management process. So on the one side of things, you're going through the determination of the alignment of your strategies to your investment portfolio. We then work out which of those, based on your prioritization, we want to execute. We do a bunch of categorization and classification so we can understand better the portfolio as a whole. When they're kicked off, we want to execute those under good management control. We want to see that the benefits are going to be banked everywhere along the way. We want to make sure that the financial management and disciplines are in place and that risk and stakeholders are managed and engaged in the process. Clearly, we also want to make sure that the organizational governance and approvals processes are followed. And finally, we want to make sure that we've got the resources, manpower, equipment, and cash, etc., to be able to deliver these or deliver this portfolio well to meet the benefit. That's what we talked about last week. But right now, I'm going to hand across to Pierre, who will take us through the rest of today's session.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
I'll stop sharing, so well done.
Cool. Oh. Thank you, Andrew. So I'm just coming to it. Right, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for attending this third session. So really to thank you, Andrew, as well for the recap and positioning it for this afternoon. Just so that everybody is clear, this is not a training course in portfolio management or even in P3M3. What it is presenting to you how you can best get advantage in implementing improvement program, project and portfolio management improvement within your organization. And what we propose is more than just a tool. We need to look at the entire organization, and the previous session went and covered this, in particular the portfolio definition. And today we're going to look at P3M3 as a prerequisite to implementing a PPM tool, because we find that it is extremely useful in framing an organization to work out the strong point, what we can capitalize on, and to work out the various gaps and the aspect that needs to be remediated before.
Sorry, Pierre.
Yes.
Can you share your screen?
Oh,
I'm not seeing
it. I thought I was sharing. Sorry about this. I thought I was sharing. Nope.
Oh, you've started. That's it.
Nope. That's very strange. Excuse me for that. Is this better?
That's
Should see
perfect.
a
Thank you very
slide
much.
doing things right. Thank you, Andrew, for that. As I was saying, yes, is getting P3M3 to work out in your organization across a number of perspectives that we're going to have an overview today. And that will bring out a holistic view, which is really what we think organizations need to implement project, program, and portfolio improvement. So the package, the tool, plus P3M3 in advance of the implementation is a very, very strong approach to what you need to do. So today, let's focus a bit on that P3M3. I mentioned it a number of times, and it stands for Portfolio, Program, Project Management Maturity Model. And it's an Axelos product. Axelos is a mix between private companies and the UK Cabinet Office. But the important matter is that it is completely system agnostic. You don't need to have any of other Axelos processes or anything. It will apply to any organization in any case. So what it does really is, as we see on the right-hand side of the slide, it covers any of the domain, be it the portfolio, program, or project. So you do not have to do across the entire portfolio. It does make sense, however, to have a fairly wide coverage of your P3M3. And in the previous session, we said we need to define what the organization is. Is it the entire corporation, or is it a specific department that you want to develop, or is it a specific geographical location? There are no good or wrong answers. It just needs to be defined at the start, because it's very important to have boundaries regarding your implementation. Okay, P3M3 will give you 5 levels of maturity, plus, of course, level 0, which means that there's not a lot there in effect. Going very quickly through each level. Level 1 is awareness of what's going on. So you will have people that know that they need to apply risk management, but not too sure how it should be done. And you may have people that know that some templates need to be filled in, or that there are some specific safety processes to be followed, but again, not too sure where it is or what it is. So it's really a starting point, and that's done through broad training or generic information, usually disseminated from the top and hoping for the best. Sometimes you have some hero people who are very good, very specialist in a domain, and they will be relied on to, but if they are isolated in a system, their helpfulness, should we say, will be limited to where they are. So it is still a starting point, but very often level 1 demonstrate a fairly chaotic situation. So moving on to level 2, that's already better, because the key characteristic is repeatability. And what it means, we've put there in terms of facilitation, templates, and form, but it means that your processes or what you're doing are documented. So you can refer to a document, to a process, to a system in a wide sense of the term, to repeat the same process, which hopefully brings some savings initially, because you don't have to reinvent something, you don't have to recreate something, you just reuse what was done before, and you sort of align your results to what was done before. So savings in time, savings in process, and so on. That's already a good point to be at. However, repeatable in one place of the business and another place of the business and yet another place of the business becomes not that far from level 1. In effect, you fall back into the chaotic bit. So level 3 is one of the most interesting one for most organizations, and one that they aspire to reach. It's the centralized characteristic, where your processes and your basically your ways of doing business, ways of defining and delivering are centralized. And that means that it start being your repeatable processes are embedded, they're scaled up to the organization. And then again, that's the importance of defining the boundaries of the organization, because it may well be that the organization, being a key department within your corporation, is level 3 centralized, whereas the corporation itself is not yet centralized. So centralized is what starts bringing some serious savings there, because usually you will have systems in place, databases in place, either workflow or at least one version of the truth, one version of report and document that you can refer to. And that is really, really important in terms of doing savings. Moving on to the other 2 levels, and before I move to level 4 and 5, then we need to ask ourselves the questions. Where do we want to go? Do we need to go that high? How much money is it going to cost to implement new behaviors, new processes, new system? And that's a question for each organization, and we'll look into that in a minute. Now, level 4, the key characteristic is quantifiable. So I've mentioned savings a few minutes ago on level 2 and level 3. Level 4 is starting to actually measure what's going on, measure those savings, measure your accuracy in predicting schedule, measure your accuracy in delivery. Is it going on time? Do you have a baseline? Are you delivering along the baseline? Are you consistently late or consistently early in delivery? All of these things then start being measurable, and when you measure them, you can then action. One of the principles for management information is for it to be actionable information. So what would be the point in delivering various measures if you can just look at them, what we call measure admiration? You have to have measures that are actionable. And the quantifiable level 4, for example, would mean that you apply risk analysis to your schedule, risk analysis to your costings, which means that you have not only one point, but you may have a range of cost and a range of delivery date that you will be 90% able to hit. That sort of approach will bring some certainty, some quality into your business, and yet again, some savings. And the final level, level 5, and I should say where we want to go may not be level 5, because level 5 is all about optimizing, it's all about predictive analytics, and it does really require an awful lot of knowledge and history in the organization to start going into predictability, looking deep into trends and analytics. So if people would like to do so, that's great, but I should really let you know that to my knowledge, I do not know an organization that is at level 5. They're really, really infrequent. That said, in various smaller organization, i.e. a subset of a corporation, you may well have aspiration to go to level 5. Okay, so to summarize again, what we're presenting today is this measure. How is this measure, level 1 to level 5, going to help you? So for this, we need to dive a little bit more into the detail. And that's why I say P3M3 is a prerequisite to PPM tool implementation, because it will make you ask the questions you should ask yourself about the business before moving on to implementing something. This one is basically a very high level summary. And I've put the 3: strategic objective, one version of the truth, and good governance processes. This does not profess to be the be-all and end-all. However, let's give it a minute to each. If you remember in a portfolio definition session, the previous session, strategic objective, when I was talking about it, I was repeating it and repeating it and repeating it again to I'm sort of feeling sick of repeating so much this way, but it's so important. That's really your drivers. That's what you will use to prioritize what you do. And not only you should be your driver, but you should have people standing behind those strategic objectives. So ownership, standing behind somebody senior in a company saying, this is what we need to do. And through their leadership, appoint or be themselves a champion to represent what the business is all about. And in theory, those strategic objectives will be subject to fairly infrequent changes. You're not going to change strategy every 2 weeks. However, you need to be ready to adapt your strategy when you need to. The second one, which is important in this context of implementing a tool, is one version of the truth, which means that you have a set of data that you can exploit and trust. The key word is it's authoritative data. So do away with copies of something that is tweaked and put in an Excel spreadsheet and emailed across and changed a little bit by a colleague and moved on to a report, which is yet again beautified and removing some red flags maybe to put something a little bit less shocking. Basically, we use data and information for decision support. So we owe it to the own organization to have the real data if we can. And one way to see it is to have one pot of data where everybody contributes, but it's one set and it gets sliced and diced and exploited in different ways. So you can have a common reporting environment. It doesn't even need to be a single database, but your reporting environment should call authoritative data from potentially various databases, but you should not have conflict. You should have master data. We won't go much deeper into that, but suffice to say that efficient information management is really, really important. And when you get there, then you can put the storyline behind the data. And that's what really motivates your people, because you can show some fairly important, shocking, or vital data. But if you have the insight into the data, if you can look into it, and if you have the story to present it, that's how you will motivate the actual action that you need to have this actionable data in effect. So the report in itself is great, but the way the report is presented is even more important. Finally, both of them would be pretty useless without good governance processes. And we talked a fair bit before about it, going through various control gateways, in effect, stop code decision points, so that when our measures and our system detect things that are going outside of parameters, then we can take remedial action, which may be light remedial action up to a critical point of actually stopping a project to redeploy your resources to other strategic objective-driven projects. As I said before as well, governance rests on delegation to some extent. And if you have delegated authority, then reporting is the counterweight to that. If you have delegation authority, you can carry on your business, but you ought to report back onto what you've done. And that also is a very important aspect. The final point here is also looking at governance internally, which is mainly running program and project, but you will have external governance with your suppliers, with your external stakeholders, with potentially government stakeholders as well, compliance, and so on. So it's really important to bear this in mind. So again, those 3 points are important in the context of implementing a PPM improvement tool. Now, moving on to P3M3, I mentioned the 5 levels. So this graph will show level 0, which is really the center of the sun and best not to be there, up to 5. And it's cut across 7 perspectives. And we're going to look at each of these perspectives in a minute. But at this level, I just wanted to show it's in one chart to summarize what can be an extremely deep and detailed report. So I wanted to put it in one slide to demonstrate what it's like. Basically, a situation would be when an organization has got a low level of maturity, and usually you will find that if you lift the bonnet, in effect, as if lifting the bonnet of a car, or if you start probing, they will have a fairly low level of maturity, and that's the blue spider chart in the middle there. Moving on to a post-implementation, you are likely to increase maturity. There's never any guarantees because organizations all differ, but the idea and the aspiration is to at least centralize what you're doing and reach from a level 1-ish to a level 3. Now, the red line shows the self-assessment. So P3M3, we won't go into massive detail, but you can do a self-assessment which is extremely limited. Usually you will have a huge positive bias, and people will consider themselves at a much higher level than they are. And that can be a good thing in that it will spur them into considering their organization, but it can also be a fairly dangerous thing in that they would run assumption of being good in various areas. I'll take back the example of risk management, where in fact they may not be, or they may not apply the principles properly. That could have some very serious consequences for the business. So this spider chart is cut across 7 perspectives. We've got organizational governance, management control, benefit management, risk management, stakeholder engagement, finance management, and resource management. We'll quickly visit each of them and look at some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves for each of these. The beauty of the system is that it will then give you an overall view, a holistic view, as I was saying earlier on, of your organization. And some will be pretty high, like for in this instance here, management control is pretty good post-assessment, and some may be pretty low. So it gives you a targeted action plan. A couple of points then on each of the perspective. Organizational governance is how you run the business in effect, how you make your decision, how you delegate the decision, and who are the people who are controlling what is going on in the business. So I've put a number of questions here. How well can you demonstrate your decision making is evidence-based? That's back to the decision support I was mentioning earlier on. You need to have good data to make sure that any decision made at any level in a governance is evidence-based rather than on instinct or on subjective matters. The second one, I went on and on and on about it in the previous session, which is all about strategic objective. Organizational governance should be really concerned about this in terms of prioritizing and, again, controlling what is prioritized and what is not prioritized. Under governance, to some extent, you could put assurance as well. So how sure are we that we are going to deliver successfully this program or this project? Governance is obviously interested in this. And then in terms of improving the business, because that's what we're talking about, how is organizational governance playing into this? And a lot of it is senior management. I mentioned championing later on, representation of the strategic objective, representation of commitment to get better. And that's all about visibility and behaviors as well. Then when we have also delegation of authority, so I mentioned we can delegate authority to make probably the business more agile, so less steps before making a decision, but that is counterbalanced by the reporting back. This is a decision we've made, and put it back up the chain. Moving on to the next one, management control is really keeping a hand to get the business going where it needs to be. It's all about setting parameters and controlling how the business goals. So if you do stray out of parameters, then you will have various processes, some escalation processes, some remediation processes, such as change control, such as contingency, such as applying various fallback, or critically stop an initiative that is not delivering as it should. You will have a whole range of tools at your disposal to basically start from a small remedial action, minor adjustment, to a full decision to stop and go. On this one, I've put again about dependencies between program projects. It's all very well to make decision on stopping and carrying on, but what happens on other dependent projects? If you stopped the project about building new offices, where are you going to put your customer center? What's the fallback? So there's an awful lot to consider there. And again, in management control, all these decisions should be made from one version of the truth, as an authoritative data set that gets exploited when you get different reports for different audiences, but a single reporting environment, an authoritative data set. The next one is the third in the list, but it's really, truly important: benefit management. That's one that very often gets overlooked and people don't give it enough time. But benefits is why we are carrying improvement to the business. It's why we are in business, for starters. This is why we get up every day. So we should really make sure we give them all the attention that we should. And that starts as early as doing it in a business case. So you would have a business case on one side. How much is it going to cost us to do this? So much. Yes. What are we getting out of it? And that's all the benefit management side of this. And what are we getting out of it? Curiously, can be articulated in some ways and not measured later on. And we just assume we've done well and give ourselves a pat on the back and move on to another project. But really, you ought to have a benefit management strategy from day one. How are we identifying the benefit? Are we approving the benefit? Is this what benefit we want, in other words? And how are we going to measure them as they occur? So really, the what stage of a program project consider benefit realization? Answer to that one, the bonus one, it's as early as you can, really. Risk management. Okay, this one is interesting too, because it really covers the whole of your improvement initiatives. And risk management can be fairly tentacular, if I could use that word in business. Risk. People will know about risk and they will say, oh yes, there is a risk of this. There's a chance or a probability that this and this happens. But less frequently will they know how to manage it, will they know how to quantify the impact of a risk on the business. And that's back to those levels I mentioned earlier on. If you remember, level 4 is about quantification. So if you have a P3, M3 that identifies risk management as something that needs improvement in your organization, you will have a plan in place to go to quantifying risk aspect to your business and bring a positive impact on your delivery. And there are, I mean, it's we could do a session just on this, really, so I won't go too far. But what is interesting is that risk I mentioned about asking question makes you think ahead. It forces you to look ahead 1 day, 6 months, 1 year ahead and say, okay, now we are in this situation, but what's going to happen in 6 months' time if such and such happens? What is going to happen next year when this is built, and so on? Or what if something is not happening? And it's a very interesting exercise as a team group, as a team exercise, really to get the team aligned on one vision. And it's very interesting when you get the various agile risk management method, which really put people together. You would expect risk to be a fairly adverse and negative aspect, but it can be a good opportunity to get your team solid to basically present a remedy to these risks. So talking about team and people, moving to stakeholder engagement. This one is obviously very important because the people aspect, the human factor, as I call it, is really, really conditioning everything else. And you will have internal and external stakeholders. You will have various formal communication, such as signing a contract, which is like a legal document. And you will have informal communication, which is really sitting down and have a cup of tea with somebody and thrash out the various problems that may occur. And it's a very informal conversation, very informal communication, but that can nonetheless yield an awful lot of benefit for your business. So in terms of the PPM tool, program and project management tool, stakeholder management will be greatly facilitated again by information repository, because it's all very well to talk about things, but these things that you're talking about needs to come from somewhere, and that's called data most of the time. And based on this data, you can interpret them and then make your decision on this. And that's at every level with stakeholder engagement. The last two, I would suggest I go fairly quickly over finance management and resource management. That's the other side of the business case, basically. How much is it going to cost? And who is going to be working there? And how do we prioritize? Because very often, unfortunately, we have limits on the financial aspect of things and on the resource management of things. So we do need to prioritize. We do need to apply various controls to make sure that there's no waste going on. And we need to make sure that we forecast, so we get an idea of where we're going to be in 6 months' time, in a year's time. And now you can see that's where everything is getting together into one holistic picture. Because if you forecast for a year's time, then you should apply a risk factor to this. Okay, best case scenario, worst case scenario, most probable scenario. And these will be different ranges that you can then work within. So the PPM tool that you will have, or risk management tools or other tools, will help you square these ranges in finance and resource management and help you prioritize them. And this will be done on a regular rhythm, but also you need to monitor it to make sure you remain within these parameters. And that makes you fall back into the management control side of things. So to avoid the danger of going over and over again, hopefully you will have seen that these 7 parameters cover the entirety of the business. And I will invite feedback through the chat or at the end of this session if you think otherwise, if you think that there are other aspects that we need to look at, that we need to measure. I'd be really, really interested to hear that from you, because again, not any organization is like another one. For some organization, there will be some very critical places that I may have overlooked, and that this model, P3M3, may not give enough credence to. So we do need to get your feedback on that, and so that we can, within the model, tweak the approach and adjust the approach. Moving on to the next slide. Andrew had mentioned benchmarks. So one aspect of P3M3 is that results are anonymously recorded, but there are various criteria that are recorded, such as the country where the organization is and the type of business. So I have a couple of figures here, which is for 20 African countries that we had, and I won't have the details here, and if you want to go into detail, by all means, do get in touch, as Andrew mentioned, by email, info@hydeparksolution.com, and we can go into more details if you want, because you may want to compare your organization to what else is going on in the world. But here is for Africa, overall and construction. So the blue line is the average score for all the type of business, and the amber line is about the construction. And we will see, very interestingly, that is pretty high score, actually. It's a very commendable score. However, I dare say it's likely to have this positive bias that we mentioned earlier on apply to this. But then again, one could assume that construction would rely on fairly strong control, because you do have to have plans in place, and fairly strong risk management, because the management of risk and safety and compliance is probably more prevalent than in some other sector. You will see resource management and finance management are also fairly strong, because often people will have a kind of financial management system or a kind of resource management system. But again, we need to be extremely wary of the positive bias through self-assessment. Moving to another one, which is incomplete on that one. We haven't got representative figure for all the perspective there. But we can see, so the whole line is similar, it should be the same for that matter. Government policy and transport, we can see here there's a very low level of maturity in various areas, in fact in most areas, and way between 1 and 2 to some extent. That's where most people will be, and all across the world for that matter. I think more than 3/4 of organizations are below level 3. And I'll come back to in a minute to what it means to any one of us. The final one I add is mining, metal, and energy. And that seems to pretty much correlate with the overall figures. And again, you can see it's hovering around the 2. And now a little bit of a damping news, I'm afraid, in that the overall score usually would be affected by the lowest score. So if you have organizational governance, management control, benefit management at 3, risk management at 4, stakeholder at 3, finance at 4, and if resource management is 1, the overall score will be 1. It won't be an average. It will be the weakest element in the chain, and that is a very strong consideration that we need to bear in mind. You know, if we talk about implementing PPM improvement, what is the weakest element in the chain? We need to make sure that it's not going to make your organization trip on something that can be fairly obvious, whilst on the other side of the organization, you're implementing some top quality, top-notch system. So you do have to keep a sense of balance. And again, P3M3 can give you useful information on that front. Now, how do we interpret those figures? We've just looked at averages for 20 countries. So it's just to give a flavor of what it is. And I did mention just now that the vast majority of organizations are below. Oh, that's I'll have to change that in a slide. They are below level 3. And that means that it's good news for everybody, because if you have an organization that can react quickly, that is fairly agile in the way they do things, and you can then gain quickly competitive advantage and demonstrate your efficiency. So apologies for that. Just repeat, that's a lot of organizations are below level 3. So that gives us an awful lot of room for improvement. And that's across the world, not only Africa. Then looking at this as well, what we need to look at is where we are, where we started, which is not for everybody, but likely to be a low level of maturity, where we are aware of what we need to do. Maybe we've got some documentation, to where we want to be to achieve savings. And ideally, it's at least level 3, centralized. And that's where a PPM tool is going to help you an awful lot very quickly to get to that level. And in fact, if you have a tool, it's very likely to hold measures and take you an awful long way to level 4, where you can realize even more savings. So the tools I'm talking about is part of the answer. So in a few words here, so you can have proper schedule management, so introduce control into what you want to do. You will have collaboration features, you may have workflow, you can have, as I mentioned, also the application of risk. It's going to force, and the tool is going there to enforce the process for benefit reporting, for example. So it is going to enforce, but in a supportive way, not in a way that's going to slow a business, but on the contrary, in a way that's going to make it faster in terms of sharing the same information, in terms of updating it in one place and once only, and so on and so on. And also, it will help in applying various processes, such as complicated quantitative risk algorithm that would take days to do manually. So they can do that very, very quickly. Now, the P3M3 analysis, as I said, will indicate what needs to be done first. So if your risk management is low, if you say we can come up with a risk management plan, it's a very big toolbox. And P3M3 is the toolbox. And the PPM tools are the tools inside it. So ideally, you need both, really. So I won't repeat the risk. I've just mentioned it here on this slide. But again, it's one very good example where quantitative data will help you make good and more certain decision, more consistent decision that you can trust and act on. Finally, P3M3 is not really a tick-a-box job. It's more like forensics. You are looking at line of inquiries. There's very rarely, I say, system agnostic, so there's very rarely good or bad answers. The idea is to see what's there and what can be improved and rate it within that grade from 1 to 5. So the P3M3 will provide you all of these things where you are now, which is really the first question you need to ask yourself. And the second question is where you want to be, a level 3, 4, 5. And it's not the number that matters, but it is the savings and the investment that's supposed to be done to get to that savings. And that's part of what we're talking about in those sessions. If you want to implement a project and program and portfolio management tool, it's really a pre-implementation stage that will yield so much benefit at the time of implementing the tools, because it will ask the right question. It will bring those lines of inquiries I've just mentioned across the entire organization, all the perspective. And again, if you have other views in terms of perspective, I invite you to submit it just in a minute when we open the microphone or the chat to people. It will therefore save time in implementing the tool, because the consultant implementing the tool will already have the documentation of what's going on. It will have documentation on the prerequisite, on your ways of doing things and where you want to be, on what the strong spots are, on what the weak points are. So that's really, really important. Moving on to it, it's also going to involve people. So it's going to be a good opportunity to engage people in your organization to get on board with your PPM improvement. And it will also bring a plan in place, a roadmap. I'll go to that in 1 second on the slide. And as I mentioned, PPM tool, it will support the relationship with your tool implementer or tool integrator, because you will share this. You will share the diagnostic in confidence most of the time, of course, but you will then have the gaps in front of you as a team, a supplier and a customer, so you can address them in a single fashion. That's one of my last slide, which proposes a roadmap to improvement. On the very top there, I've just put articulation of business needs. So we all have questions. We say, oh, how can I do this better? I know there are some spreadsheets that I am filling. I know I'm copying information from A to B. Oh, wouldn't it be good if we could just save time and money and do it in a more efficient way? So you'll have a business case for improvement at some stage, which you may want to help from the various people. And you'll have then what we suggest is that you have P3M3 coming in terms of the key initiator to business improvement. So the P3M3 analysis will provide you not only with a figure for each perspective, but the key steps to go where you want to be. So you'll have a result and a plan. And I've summarized that very, very briefly in an ongoing efficiency program that looks at the usual aspect of people, change management, training, what's going on, technology, PPM tooling, and that will be the object of the fourth session later on 24th of September, and processes, process review. All of these are basically the cogs, the mechanism of your business. We have mentioned that it is good practice to do the right things, prioritize. So this should be really linked to a portfolio management approach, which can be just an emergent portfolio management approach. It doesn't need to be set in stone, but it will be a helpful support along the way. In a previous session, we mentioned the importance of strategic objective, which really are the drivers. And as part of the ongoing efficiency program, you're likely to have an organization review, because this improvement needs to be reflected in the way you run the business, in who's doing what and where and how. So that will have impact on people as well. And finally, one of the usual impact is changes or the implementation of a portfolio, program and project office, or a center of excellence that will support again the business in its efficiency program at some stage, usually 12 to 18 months later, but sometimes faster, especially if you have a very focused P3M3 analysis and a sharp tooling implementation. You can do that much faster. You monitor your benefit, and generally that will go on a continuous improvement aspect. So I think that covers my aspect. So I hand back to Andrew for finishing. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll stay on so that I can answer any question you may have at the end of the presentation.
Right, guys, I'm just going to share this. Here we go. So thanks very much, Pierre, for taking us through that. I think, as we can see from what Pierre's been saying, portfolio management is the hinge of where everything rests and where everything steps from. So it's really important that we have some form of basis to capture our initiatives with a view to aligning those to strategy and ensuring that the business gets delivered the benefits that it's expecting from them. And we've had a look at the 7 perspectives of P3M3, whether that be organizational governance, management control, benefit or risk management, stakeholder engagement, financial management, and resource management. So each of those perspectives needs to be looked at, needs to be addressed, and it's not difficult to go through and look at each of these perspectives and work out what you need to be doing. Pierre is absolutely an expert at doing this kind of thing, and will be very keen to work with you to help you do that. Benchmarking, it was great to see some figures on Africa and some breakdown into industries. It's quite interesting that the construction industry is slightly better than other sectors within Africa. That's pretty much true when you look at the European and the global picture. One of the things actually is that in most sectors and industries, so for example, retail or manufacturing, there's been a lot of investment in tools and technologies. There's been a comparable investment in technology and tools as well in the construction industry and portfolio, program and project management. The big difference is that not a lot of those tools have been used in a way that's going to, or that has historically generated significant efficiencies. Now that's a bit troubling from anybody's perspective, but we're going to take a bit of a look at that in the section, or the session rather, in a couple of weeks' time. Pierre also took us through the road to efficiency. It's a nice little diagram that I particularly like, in that it helps us understand the processes that we need to standardize and enforce and embed with the help of tools. And a couple of things that I took from this is that we should be focusing on portfolio management over project management. The P in PMO means portfolio management office, not project. If you're in the weeds looking at individual projects, you're only going to have a very minor effect on your organization's future. If you're managing at a portfolio level through your portfolio management office, this is going to be critical for your organization's future and for your government or country or company in delivering the outcomes. Tools, like projects, we should be thinking more strategic, not short term. We've seen a lot of customers who've gone and bought a very simple tool that has limitations if you want to do more complex, more best practice kind of things later. And one of the things that we keep telling our customers, it's far better to buy a tool now that will enable you to do 100% of what you want to do in the future, rather than a tool that does 100% of your 10% now. So the cost of changing tools is far more than buying the correct tool in the first place. And we're going to look at more of those kind of issues next time when we talk about whether it's better to use an abacus for your financial numbers. So with that, what we'd like to do is we'd like to open up the phones and see whether anybody would like to raise any questions. So Lucas, can you open up can you